We're going to jump right in. And I want to start by saying we've known each other for many, many years. I would say 8 years. How many years do you think it's been?
I think so. Yeah, we met. It was Chris's birthday party that we met, right?
It was 2000. My book was coming out 2013. I asked you to endorse the book. I remember meeting you at Chris Carlson's house in California.
Yep.
We had just moved.
Yep. Summer of 2013 sounds about right?
Yes. And the book came out in November. And I remember going to you, and I was such a newbie, and saying to you, Mike, will you endorse my book? And I remember your kindness. I remember it so clearly. And you, of course, anything you need, and not only just endorse your book, but anything you need, just let me know. And I felt your warmth and I felt your support. And as you know, not everyone is this way, but I will never forget that.
Well, thank you. I remember meeting you and your husband, and then getting to know your family. And I mean, well, first of all, just our mutual friend, Chris Carlson, is such an important person in my life. And her late husband, Richard, was my mentor and was so kind and generous to me. And I think one of the things that I've learned in this work that you and I have the honor of doing all these years, I mean, yeah, people have their stuff, but in general, there have been so many people who've been so kind and so generous to me over the years, and helping me and supporting me and explaining things to me and going out of their way when they didn't have to. And I didn't know what the hell was going on. To me, it always just feels like a virtuous cycle that whenever I meet someone, like I met you that night and could tell how earnest you were and how passionate you were in what you were doing. If there's anything I can do to help, it's really such a gift to me.
And you've always been like that. I'm going to turn the light. It's so bright there. I'm just going to turn this way a little bit. And you've been like this throughout the years we've known each other. So Mike, I want to know how this guy in front of me came to be. And I have an idea, and I've read everything and I know everything, not everything. Hopefully we'll share some things people don't know about. I want to go all the way back to your childhood and the early days. Tell me a little bit about Mike as a 7-year-old.
7-year-old. So I grew up in Oakland, California, not that far from where I live now, about 45 minutes from where I live. And 7 years old, it was becoming a bit challenging in my house. I mean, my parents split up when I was 3. My mom raised me and my older sister, Lori, as a single mom. And by about 7, so my dad, we did the every other weekend at my dad's house. He lived about an hour away in a place called Daly City, which is a little south of San Francisco. My dad was actually in radio, but my dad lost his job. And my dad suffered from bipolar disorder, which I didn't know what the heck that was as a kid. And they called it manic depression in those days. But basically, my dad got really sick and really depressed over the next 5 years, from about 7 to 12, and was in and out of halfway houses and, mental institutions, and just it really having a tough time. I mean, and now as an adult, I can look back and think, oh my goodness, that must have been such a incredibly difficult, challenging time for him. But all I knew is that my dad wasn't around, and my parents had already split up, but now he wasn't around at all. And my mom was, doing the best she could, but didn't have much money, wasn't making much money, was trying to scramble around to figure out how to fend for herself and for us. So it was, it was definitely a challenging time. And simultaneously, I was a relatively happy kid. I knew there was a lot of pain and stress and fear going on in my house. And in some ways, and probably in an unhealthy way, quite frankly, Christina, I decided I'm going to be the savior, right? I'm the cute kid. I'm the baseball player. I'm the I'll make everybody happy. It'll all be fine, which obviously many, many years and lots of therapy later, I realized wasn't the healthiest approach, but that was kind of how I reacted to it as a kid.
Oh, and I was thinking to myself, if you didn't have that extreme nature of circumstances, I don't think your success would have happened, to be honest with you, because you had to develop skills. And from what I was reading, there was a lot of, I wouldn't say, should I use the word poverty? Is that too strong of a word? What do you think?
No, I mean, I think, look, we hit it pretty well, sort of white family living in sort of a middle-class neighborhood. But yeah, I mean, it was we were broke. I mean, my mom, and I don't know how she did it, quite frankly, but they bought that house in 1973, and under, Prop 13 in California kept the property taxes low. Her mortgage was really low and her property taxes were low. So she was able to navigate. But, there was definitely, I mean, I think we would have been on food stamps or government assistance, except for the fact that she owned the house and didn't qualify. And as I got a little bit older, and my mom started her own business and she never had a ton of success, so she struggled financially for most of her life. But as I got into middle school and high school, she started to make a little bit more money, so things weren't quite as tight as they were. But in those early days, like when I was around 7, and when my dad stopped paying child support, basically, so my mom was on her own to fend for herself with us, it was tough.
What did your mom do? What was her business?
Well, my mom's background, my mom was actually a PE teacher. So she had been an athlete. And this is like pre-Title IX, when my mom was growing up, when girls weren't playing sports, but my mom was an athletic girl and had played sports, and then got her teaching credential and taught until she and my dad got married. And then when she got pregnant with my sister, it was the late 60s. My dad was like, yeah, you're not going to work. And so she didn't. And then when my mom started back working, she got a job working for a friend and was a meeting planner and was doing some sort of operational kind of administrative assistant stuff. And then eventually she ended up starting her own business as a wholesale sales rep. She had some friends who were making, at the time, I mean, again, think of this as like late 70s, early 80s, like feather earrings and feather jewelry and things and scarves and all. And my mom, these folks were like artists and they were creating this stuff, but my mom had enough business savvy. She would like go into Mervyn's and Macy's and these places and get orders for her friends who were creating this stuff. And then she got a commission and she was like, oh, this is like a business. So she became a wholesale sales rep, and that's what she did. It evolved the products that she represented, but she did that until she died back in 2011. So, and she loved it. She was really into fashion and she was into accessories and things. So it sort of fulfilled this need for her, and she got, decently good at it. It's hard to make a living, make a lot of money doing that.
But she was an entrepreneur, really, right?
She was. I mean, the thing is, I would say, she never really I don't think she ever called herself that. By the end of it, she kind of realized like, I guess I was this entrepreneur businesswoman, but that was always a struggle. She really liked the work itself and liked people, and really liked a lot of the stores that she called on. She had a lot of real relationships. And I actually helped her in the business from an early age. I used to help her set up her booths at trade shows. And I was just interested because I was interested. And my mom, one of the best things my mom did for me and my sister growing up, and some of it was just she had to, because she didn't have a spouse at home. She never got remarried. She talked to us like adults from the time we were really little. And she encouraged us to talk to adults. So I became a really curious, interested kid that was like, 8, 9 years old. They'd just walk up to a grown-up and shake their hand and start a conversation. They would look at my mom like, who is this kid? What's he doing? And it was like, I was just taught to be interested and curious, respectful, but also just like, hey, you have something valuable to say, even though you're a 9-year-old boy, like, go for it. And then my mom started having me in the booth with her by the time I was probably 12, 13 years old. And I'm taking orders and, just because I wanted to support my mother and I was interested and curious about the world. So I guess I did get some of that entrepreneurial and sort of business interest from my mother.
And it's amazing. I can actually visualize you there in the booth. Did you ever feel, if you could remember your feelings during those early years in your life, were they, and I know you developed these skills and you were able to talk to everyone and be present, but did you feel fear? Do you remember that at all?
Oh yeah, there was a lot of fear and anger in my house, quite frankly. And I remember, like, there's a moment that I remember, Christina, that's like sort of etched in my memory. I was probably around 6, 7, 8, sometime around that age. And it was raining, in the Bay Area where you used to live, right? We don't get a lot of snow. We don't get but it'll rain sometimes, right? But so weather-wise, and a lot of the homes in California aren't really designed to deal with much weather at all. And anyway, it was raining. We had a series, long rainstorm, and the roof leaked. And it was an old house, built, I don't know, in the 20s. But I remember the roof leaking, and my sister and I thought it was cool. We were kids and we're running in the kitchen and getting pots and putting them on the floor as it's dripping. And my mother just breaks down and starts sobbing in the middle of the living room. And I'm like, and it scared me. It was one of those moments where it's like, I'd seen her cry. My mom wasn't a super emotional person, but the way she sobbed, I could tell she was petrified. And again, thinking about it now as an adult, she's got 2 kids and a mortgage and a house, and it's like the roof's leaking and her ex-husband is nowhere to be found because he's not well and he can't support her financially. Like, I can just imagine she's thinking, what the hell am I going to do? How am I going to deal with this? And my sister ran over to her and hugged her, and I ran over just kind of scared. And we sort of sit in the middle of the living room in a heap as a family, all kind of crying together. And I just, like, that to me kind of epitomizes in some ways the level of fear that existed in my house growing up. And my mother was this really strong, very sort of determined and stubborn woman. But she ran with a lot of fear, understandably. And I think I picked up a lot of that as well. And I've always, I mean, all these years later, like, I've worked through a lot of things in my life, but in my own work with different counselors and coaches, like, the feedback I've gotten, which I think is accurate, is that I operate even to this day with a decently high level of fear, just a higher level of determination. And that's one of the things I learned as an athlete, was like, you can be scared, but you can still go do it anyway. And I'm both grateful that I have that ability, but sometimes I have to talk to myself and say, hey man, you don't have to be so scared all the time. Like, like literally Michelle, my wife, will have to say, like, babe, because we've gone through some challenges ourselves, but like, we're not broke right now, or we're not, and she's like, you don't have to operate like that. And it's like, oh yeah, I have a lot of muscle memory around some of that stuff that's still sort of deep in there,
And Mike, as you're saying, first of all, I have chills, and I'm thinking about your mom, and when you were sharing the story about her roof and she was crying, I actually felt like I wanted to cry. Like we are now parents, and we make our own income, and we take care of our families, and I can only imagine how scared she must have been there on her own, a single mom. Yeah. She was a single mom.
Yeah. And in an era too, I mean, my mother grew up in Rhode Island, born in 1938, one of 3 daughters, Irish Catholic community. Like, she moved to California, married a Jewish man, and then got divorced. Like, you're not supposed to do those things, right? And her family, who loved her, but there was this sort of quiet sense of, from both her family and then my father's family as well, like, they didn't really reach out to help much. And some of it, again, not to throw them under the bus, they didn't know what to do. They didn't know what to say. It was just like, people didn't know how to deal with things. Not that we know a hell of a lot more now, but more of this stuff happened. So there is a sense of, hey, how do we co-parent, or how do we support the family, or things happen, or, it's not leave it to Beaver for most families. But my mother I think she also felt really isolated from her own family. And so again, I mean, I have an enormous amount of respect and appreciation for, I look at Michelle sometimes. We have 2 girls who are 14 and 11. And I think about it, especially when they were younger too. And I would say to Michelle, oh my gosh, this is so hard. And like, we love each other and have a pretty good marriage, and we're doing okay, and we have support around us. But like, this is so hard. Like, it gave me that much more empathy and appreciation for my mother, and for single parents, or, for people like yourself who go through the loss of a spouse or something that's like, as if this isn't already challenging enough, then you add something like that on top of it. It's like, how am I going to do this?
No, and a lot of people who are listening to this conversation have lost their spouses, and during this period in our lives, this coronavirus, yes. we have mothers that reach out and say, I have 3 kids at home. My husband died a year ago, and I was starting to get my life back. I got a new job. I got all those things. And all of a sudden, on top of the tragic grief that they're feeling, they have to experience the more aloneness. But I think this is why I wanted you to be on our podcast, Mike, is because you get it, my friend. You get it. And people, and as we will walk our way through your journey, which I love your journey, and I love your career, and I love what you've done. I want people to, I don't know, I'm getting chills all the time right now. I want people to see the magnificent journey, where you came from, how you grew up, and for them to understand that anyone can get to where you are. And I love what you said about your fear of being here, and then your determination higher up. I never thought about this like that. What is the first thing you think about when you wake up in the morning?
Well, it depends on the morning. These days, these days, it's, with everything going on in the world, it's hard not to just immediately go, oh my gosh, we're still in quarantine. All of this is happening. People are getting sick and dying in the world. So I'm aware of that. One of the practices I started many years ago, Christina, and it comes and goes, but this started actually even when I was in college. Like, I needed to, have the alarm wake me up. I don't anymore for the most part, unless I have to get up to go catch a flight, which isn't happening these days. But I used to, then I'd hit snooze. I wouldn't want to get out of bed and I'd hit snooze and it'd be like 7 minutes or 8 minutes or 9 minutes or whatever. And I would never really fall back asleep. But I started this practice where I would just sort of reflect on things that I'm grateful for during that time. And some of it was actually to manage my own anxiety, because having gone through some times of real anxiety, of depression myself, the mornings, first thing in the morning was really hard. Like I'd often wake up really early and then couldn't get back to sleep and then lay in bed and all the crazy negative thoughts would be running in my mind. And so some of it was just a self-preservation, a self-management technique. Like if I could focus more on what I was grateful for, my mind wouldn't start racing and I wouldn't just wake up with all that anxiety. I don't usually wake up at that same level of anxiety in my life today, although it does show up sometimes. But in general, I try to think about, things that I'm grateful for. And again, just growing up, how I grew up and where I grew up, to wake up in the bed, in the room, in the house where we now live, next to my amazing wife, who I love, there genuinely is this part of me constantly that's like, oh my gosh, like this is really amazing. And I'm grateful for the perspective. I also have a meditation practice that I try in the morning, and finally what clicked for me like 6 or 7 years ago that helped me with meditation. I've been meditating off and on for years, but always thought I was doing it wrong. I finally had someone tell me like, listen, there are a bunch of different techniques, but there's no real wrong way to do it. Like do it the way that works for you. And I was like, the way that works for me is like, I wake up, maybe I go to the bathroom, maybe I get back in bed and lay down and meditate. And they were like, well, what's wrong with that? I'm like, that's not real meditation, isn't it? Like, says who? Like the guardian of meditation in the universe? Like, if that's the way you do it, go ahead and do it. So like, that's the way I do it. And it really works for me.
Actually, that's the best meditation. I meditate in bed all the time. Like sitting in a chair going like this for me is a little, and then if you fall asleep, I do it at night mostly. If you fall asleep, it's okay.
Yeah.
Better sleep.
Totally. So yeah, I mean, I've also trained myself in the mornings now I can meditate without falling asleep. And sometimes I meditate for 5 minutes. Sometimes it's a half an hour. It depends if I have more time. I mean, back when I was traveling more, in hotel rooms, really great way for me to get centered and get grounded to whatever was going on. Because I do believe like the first part of the day, those first 10 or 15 minutes of the day, and the last part of the day, as we know from so many different spiritual teachers and connecting with all, this and teach, right? Like those are really important times, and it's tricky. I mean, I've also tried to practice. I'm better with this at sometimes than others, not sleeping with my phone next to me. If I can keep it downstairs, it's more challenging in hotel rooms and places, but if I can keep it in my office or in the kitchen so that the first thing I do isn't to pick it up or to go to bed at night. It used to be that we'd go to bed with the television on, then we'd turn the remote off. Nowadays, it's like we're staring at our phone, reading something or watching something or listening to something, and then click it off and fall asleep. It's like, again, I'm not talking about this holier than thou. I do this sometimes. I probably did it within the last week, but I notice the days that I leave my phone downstairs in the kitchen versus when it's on my bedside table, I sleep better and I feel better when I wake up in the morning.
And especially now your family's at home and you're not away. So you don't, from my daughter from college is home, and I'm like, I do not need to look at my phone.
Right.
Because you don't have to worry. Everyone is in their beds. Everyone's at home.
Right.
That gives a sense of like calm, right? Mike, I want to continue on the journey. When was the first time you really stepped outside of your current destiny? Like being in a home where your mom worked really hard, single mom, where you had to help her, where you were the guy in the house.
Yep.
And I know that something happened going into college. When was the first time when you realized, Mike, and this is not a compliment, it's a fact, when you realized you had something special and that maybe your future will be better than your past was?
Well, I appreciate the question. I mean, a lot of my focus as a kid and as a teenager and as a young man was on sports, baseball specifically. I was a baseball player. So that was the thing that I did that made me feel like I was special. And I was really good at it. Like I got drafted out of high school by the New York Yankees.
That's amazing. Can I just say I know you've lived with this for many years, but in that moment in time, what happened? Did your brain burst? My brain would have just kind of gone into these beautiful pieces and then never came back together the same way.
Well, the day I'll tell you the story of the day I got drafted though. So I'm a senior in high school. It's June. It's the end of my senior year. I mean, I was a really good baseball player. I'd already been recruited and committed to go to Stanford in the fall, but the draft happens in June, and you can get, if you're coming out of high school or coming out of college, you can get drafted. So I knew it was a possibility. I didn't think I was going to sign a contract because I wanted to go play in college. And so, but the phone rings in my American government class, and Mr. Richter, my teacher, picks up the phone, and then he looks at me with a really stern look on his face, says, Mike Robbins, you have to go to the office right now. And I'm a little scared, like, am I in trouble? Did something bad happen? As I'm walking across campus at Skyline High School in Oakland, which is a big old campus, I have to walk from the portables all the way to the front office, which is a long walk. My mind is racing, like, did somebody die? What happened? I'm wondering, right? And then I get to the office, and the secretary in the office is there, and she knows me and I know her, and she's crying. And I'm like, oh God, someone did die, right? And it was actually, and I get the phone, and it's my mom telling me that the Yankees just called and that they drafted me. And everyone in the office is like, cheering. And I'm sort of having this weird experience of like, okay, well, I'm glad it's that and not something bad. But it was, it was just a surreal experience. And I go back to class, and the kids are all excited and everybody. And it was just this like, oh my gosh, I just got drafted by the New York Yankees. Like it didn't seem real.
It's beyond, but Mike, it's just, these moments that happen that are so extreme, like something happens to your brain in that moment that kind of expects other big moments like that to happen again afterwards, right?
Well, and I think in some ways what I've learned though, that, so then to answer your question though, so I don't sign with the Yankees, but I'm super grateful and humbled that they draft me. I go to Stanford in the fall. And what was interesting about my experience, so I go to Stanford, it's only it's 45 minutes in the other direction from Oakland, where I live now. It's down in the South Bay, it's in Silicon Valley, right? So close, like I can literally drive. It's not far from where I grew up, but like a complete different universe.
Yeah.
The kids there, I mean, I was just like, I'd never been around people like this. And it was like, the Olympics had just happened in Barcelona that summer. We come to school in the fall. There's a kid in my dorm who won a gold medal in the Olympics as a swimmer. And it was just people, I kept meeting people like this. Oh, I'm from Italy. Oh, I was, my father's a senator. And I'm like, who are these people? Where do they come from? So I had both an inferiority complex, like, oh my gosh, how did I get in here? I'm not sure if I belong here. But at the same time, as I'm meeting a lot of these kids who are extraordinary and their resumes are amazing and all the things they've done, I'm also starting to get to know them. And I'm realizing, on the one hand, incredibly impressive. On the other hand, just like me. So it was this weird paradox of I started to learn like, oh, creating extraordinary success externally, while important, number one, isn't the only important thing. And number two, actually, we all have access to it. It's a lot more of it is a mindset and a belief. Can I do it? Because I would say to my friends, they'd say, what's it like at Stanford? Or what are the kids like at Stanford? I was like, well, they're definitely different than a lot of the kids I grew up with in a certain way. But the main difference I could see with most of the other kids I went to Stanford with, there was just this quality of a willingness to try. Like if they were going to say, hey, anyone want to try this? Most of the kids there would raise their hand and say, I'll try. Like a growth mindset, like I'll go, like why not? And you could look at it from a certain perspective and say privileged or entitled, which some of it probably was, but also just to like, why not? If not, if someone's got to do it, might as well be me. And that really rubbed off on me. But I would say, but my freshman year in college, I didn't play baseball because I had a minor injury to my pitching arm that never got better. And by the end of that year, it was in question as to whether I was going to get to play or not. And then I had a freak accident that happened, a near-death experience. I got really drunk. I had started drinking a lot my freshman year because I was, out of sorts with not playing baseball and who am I? And I ended up, I fell out of a 2-story window, Christina, and broke my back and broke my pelvis. I mean, you have kids in college, right? Imagine getting a phone call from, right? So my poor mother and sister had to drive in the middle of the night down to Stanford Hospital. I amazingly didn't die. I didn't paralyze myself, but I'm in the hospital, wake up. I don't even remember what happened. I was so drunk, I blacked out. And they tell me what happened. I still don't believe it. I have so much shame, so much embarrassment, so much just terror. I can't believe I did this to myself. But here was the thing, the silver lining of that experience, as terrible as it was, I ended up recovering from the injuries and everything that happened. All these kids kept coming to come see me, the friends that I had made freshman year at Stanford. And I remember having the thought, I thought what made me unique, what made me special, what made me valuable was the fact that I was a really good baseball player, that I thought I was going to get to play pro baseball and I was this standout athlete. And here I was, none of these kids, even the guys on my baseball team, I hadn't played that year because I'd been injured, but all of my friends from the dorm and others, they knew I was on the team, but they didn't care about that. That wasn't why they showed up to come tell me that they were worried about me or that they loved me or that they cared about me. And I remember thinking maybe, and I know this seems like a basic idea, but I was 19 years old. Maybe there's something more valuable to me than simply just being a good athlete. Maybe I have something special that actually resonates with and connects with other human beings. That's not just about how I look and how I talk and if I get good grades or all the external stuff and, win games on the baseball field. And that was the first real significant moment in my life that I started to go, oh, I think there's a lot more going on here than what meets the eye.
And I like I'm sitting here, I can see the hostel bed. I can see all these guys coming in to see you. And even though you had the awareness and the insight to point out to yourself that who you are is about who you are inside of you, and people love you for that more than the external success. However, it must have been, Mike, a tragic loss. Like this is a big loss in your life.
It was, what ended up happening, I was able to play baseball again after that for 2 more years at Stanford. Then I did get drafted again by the Kansas City Royals, and I did sign a pro contract, and I go into the minor leagues with Kansas City. And then I get injured again, like significantly, so much so that I have 3 surgeries on my arm and my baseball career does end. I get hurt at 23 and I'm finally done at 25. So that span between being in the hospital bed at 19, fast forward to my 25th birthday, I go through a ton of ups and downs with my baseball career and injuries. And when my career finally ended, it was a huge loss, Christina. I mean, and I had dealt with it in a minor way prior. So it wasn't that I had no preparation whatsoever, but when it finally, the reality of, dude, you're never going to play baseball again. Even though I had that awareness back then at 19, when the reality set in, I was terrified and also hadn't really dealt with much loss in my life up to that point. Hadn't had a friend in high school die that was really sad and tragic. A buddy of mine on my baseball team died in an car accident. But other than that, grandparents, I think they were, one of them was, I really just hadn't, so the dealing with this loss of identity and loss of who I was, it was my first of then what turned out to be many experiences of real significant loss and grief. But the thing about loss, when someone doesn't die, and even though I know you talk to so many people and had experience yourself, when someone dies, the world does relate to you and understand that it's time for grief. Now, not that we know how the hell to do that or what that means, and it's super painful, but when you lose something like a relationship or injure your pitching arm and your career goes away, like, I don't know that the world shows up with a lot of support around, oh, how are we going to support you in grieving this loss? It's kind of like, deal with it, get over it, figure out what you're going to do with the rest of your life. Isn't that why you went to college? There was a lot of people didn't, and a lot of people hadn't had that same experience. So just like if someone loses a spouse, as awful as that is, or a child, other people can show up and say, I've had that experience. I know you're going to be okay, even though it sucks and it hurts really bad. When I hurt my arm, there weren't a ton of people around me that knew what to do or what to say, because they were all kind of looking at me like, I hope you'll be fine. But they sort of ran away from me.
I name these kind of losses invisible losses, because they are actually, and I know it's hard to articulate it this way, because people know that I have, like you, I have respect for loss of a spouse, loss of a child, loss this kind of loss of a parent or sibling, as you very well know. But I think the invisible loss that you experienced, what happens to something like that is hidden inside of you. You have no validation, no acknowledgement. You're left to process this completely on your own. And you at 25, which is, as you know now, that's young.
Very young.
You're 2 years younger than me. And you're born 74, 72.
Yep.
So 25, we both know this is a young age. And at 25, the number one thing you had created in your life was taken away from you because of this injury.
Yeah.
Your identity.
Well, and then to add insult to injury, no pun intended, that was February of 99, my 25th birthday, when the process of ending my career had been, but that was when I sort of declared I'm done. By that fall, the woman that I was dating and in love with and had met in college, and we'd been together for almost 4 years, left me like abruptly and just broke my heart. Never been that heartbroken in my life. And was just like, you have got to be kidding me. I literally was like looking at God and at the universe and being like, really? like, what am I supposed to do here? I mean, and left me, and like, turns out she's like fell in love with another guy and ran off with him, but didn't even really have the courage to tell me that, just literally about faced and left. And then sort of acted like I was crazy for being so upset. I mean, it was like the most insane experience, so those two losses come, sort of back to back in that same year. 1999 was a pretty rough year for me. But I do remember, I mean, it's easy to say now looking back on it. I remember at the time thinking to myself, even as I was going through it and didn't understand it and was really in the grips of the pain, the invisible part, because I kept saying people weren't acknowledging this. Like, yes, we weren't engaged, we weren't married, we hadn't been together for all these years and had babies. I get that. But like, what, like, I mean, I just didn't understand how it had happened, but then I didn't know where to turn. But those two things combined, Christina, really kind of had me it blew my ego out so much. I had to turn towards, spirituality, towards deeper questions of meaning, of like, what is life really about? And it's ultimately what got me on my path of growth and healing, which then led me to do the work that I've done for the last couple of decades. Because I was like, I cannot be the only person who is struggling with these, right? All of this pain and all of, like, I know this is part of the human condition, but like all that education that I had, which I do respect and appreciate, no one taught me anything about how to deal with any of this stuff. And I'm like, this stuff seems more important than all that other stuff that I learned all those years in school. Like, maybe we need classes on this stuff.
It's amazing how your losses actually handed you, gifted you. I don't want to use the word, I'm going to take away the word gift.
Yeah.
It sounds cliche, but because of that, you were shifted in a different universe. I love the universe, parallel universes. We can talk about physics and science here, but another conversation. But you literally were taken from this life, from the sports world with your injuries. You were shifted and moved here, and then dating this woman, and she left, and the way she left and the way it was done then moved you again to a different place. And then those two layers together, I think this is why I hope the world understands that the importance of the hidden experiences is huge. Do you know people commit suicide because of things that are invisible?
I bet. Yeah.
I mean, this. It happens. The big stars, the big actors, the big entrepreneurs, successful people who commit suicide, and everyone's like, but wait a minute, how did that happen? Everyone is great. They were doing fine, but they were not doing fine because it was hidden and invisible. And this is why I think it is important in these conversations to share these parts of your life and I know you write about them in your books, but in a way, it's even more important than the bigger losses. And I know I can get crucified about this, but it's okay.
Well, I appreciate you saying all that, because I do think, one of the things, Christina, for me, even going back to childhood and adolescence for me, I was always curious. I would sit in class in school, and, I was a good enough student and I did the things you were supposed to do at school, sports, whatever. But I was like, I had a lot of these deeper questions from the time I was really young. Like, why do I feel this way? Why am I worried about this? Or what's going on with this? Or why, the things that were happening in my own house and in my family just had me question things, and people weren't talking about those things. And so I was always drawn to, I wouldn't have used this word in those days, but I was always drawn to authenticity. It was like when someone told the truth about their experience, about how they felt, I felt that. I got those goosebumps, or that, and I would, someone's telling the truth. And then it had me feel more connected and closer to them, but also less crazy, and as a boy growing up, right, one of the things that we get trained, especially in our culture as men, it's like there's this whole man training that we get. Suck it up, be a man, boys don't cry. One of my favorite experiences when I was playing baseball was usually the last day of the season. And it was a weird kind of, I had a love-hate relationship with it, because almost always on the last day of the season, you would lose. Unless you won the championship, you would lose. So it was always a sad way to end, because only one team wins the whole thing, right? Yeah. And when we would lose, I loved winning and I loved playing, and I was super bummed like everybody else. But the last day when we would lose in the playoffs or in the championship game or whatever, we'd lose, and guys would cry. Not everybody, and nobody made a big deal about it. And it was the one time you didn't get made fun of if you cried. and it would like, they put their glove over their face or sort of walk off by themselves. But I would look and it'd be like, even the meanest, toughest, scariest guy on the team, he'd be over there crying. And I'd think to myself, first of all, now I feel closer to him. And second of all, oh, maybe I'm not so crazy because like I'm a super sensitive kid and always was. I cried really easily, although I trained myself to learn how to not cry, which a lot of us as boys do because you get made fun of more for whatever the heck you were upset about for actually showing some emotion. So you're like, don't do that. It's doubly bad. But I always loved that experience because to me, it felt like this unifying human experience. We were no longer baseball players. We were no longer even just boys. We were people having a human experience, which is I'm super bummed that this thing I wanted really bad, I'm not going to get, we're not going to get, we lost. That hurts. That's painful. That's a loss. That's an actual loss. And allowing ourselves to feel that and express our emotion around that, to me, just felt normal. It felt natural. I wanted to do that more, but I didn't often see that modeled as much in the world. And that is something that even all these years later, one of my primary passions in my work is that, like, I don't want to just tell all my crazy stories because I'm self-absorbed and want you to know all the details about my life necessarily. I just believe that the more personal, the more universal, and the more we're willing to tell the truth about our experience, right? You do this so beautifully in your work. And it's like the more people go, oh, I can't relate to your life specifically because you're different than me and you have a whole different set of experiences, but I can relate to the emotional experience if you get real, because I have my own emotional experience and it relates directly to yours because we're both human beings.
And you're a guy, and guys don't talk. And this is why your sharing of your story is even more important than sharing of my story, because men don't share their feelings. And Mike, you're not only someone who shares your story and you do it so well, but you are so hyper aware. Every time I've met you, you are very aware of your environment, my friend. I can tell. You notice change in emotion for someone else. You hear everything, not just the person you're talking to, but everything that's going on around you. What happened? Why do you have these like superpowers as a guy, being that aware of everything? As I have seen this in you every time we met, I'm like, he sees everything. Tell me I'm wrong.
Well, listen, I thank you for saying that. I honestly, as you're saying it, one of the things, I was raised by a woman, and my older sister. The two most significant influences in my life were my mother and my sister. And I mean, the interesting thing is both my mom and my sister Lori, who've both passed away, neither of them were sort of stereotypically feminine, if you will. Yeah. And I mean that they were just like my mom was tough as nails. My sister was like a tomboy growing up. And I mean, so it was, but there was something about them. And also just my life has been influenced. Like the other significant influences in my life now are Michelle, my wife, and our daughters, Samantha and Rosie. And it's like, so I have all of this feminine influence. And one of the beautiful things, and look, not every single woman and every single girl has the same qualities. There's a lot of diversity within females, just like males, right? But women much more naturally and much more intuitively can pay attention to lots of things that are going on at once, to tap into how they're feeling and how other people are feeling, and know intuitively kind of what's happening, what needs to happen, how do we, and that's more of, men by design, we're not designed that way and we're not socialized that way. But I was socialized in a way that everything in my house was oriented around females. And I mean this, and I love this. Like my mother talked about people like Gloria Steinem and Billie Jean King and Susan B. Anthony, like they were heroes because they were, but like that wasn't a strange thing. So for me, my mom took us out of school when I was 10 years old. In 1984, when Geraldine Ferraro was running for vice president, she came to town to speak at Oakland City Hall. My mom came and got us out of school and said, "You're coming to see this because this is important." That was the house that I was raised in. And so, and my sister Lori in particular, my sister was an incredible relationship builder. Like her friends and just people were really important to her. And because we didn't have a big extended family, my sister like built a community around her. And I watched her do that. And I said, first of all, I want to be like her because she was like my idol. And second of all, I want to figure out how to build and maintain relationships like Lori does, because it seemed like she had a lot of really good people in her life who really cared about her and loved her. And so again, I just emulated a lot of that, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And now, as you said it, there's all these women that you were living with, and now you're living with more women. And I'm like,
Right.
okay, I get it.
Yes.
But I think that there's something that started really early because of the situation with your dad,
Yeah.
because of the having to look out for your mom and your sister. Even if you don't say that you deliberately did it, I think you were looking out for them from the
Oh, for
beginning.
sure. Well, and I
Like,
would also say this about my father and even my grandfather, my dad's dad, and both of them, my dad especially, with struggling with mental illness. One of the things that I did really pick up from my dad that I very much appreciate, my dad was actually really sensitive, really emotional, very expressive. My father, and I didn't know that this was weird until, again, I got to college and some of my buddies commented on it. My dad, with all the challenges he had, with all the challenges in our relationship, my dad used to hug me and kiss me on the mouth from the time I was really little up until like, beard to beard when I was in my 20s. Like, that wasn't weird to me because that's just how he rolled. And his dad was the same way. And my buddies in college would be like, dude, why do you kiss your dad? Why do you hug your dad? That's weird. And I'm like, I don't know, just because that's what we do. Like, so I didn't get this sense of my father with all of his challenges. There were a lot of things my dad did or didn't do that I said, I don't want to be like that, or I don't want to do that. But in terms of being able to express and emote, I sort of got that in my genes, if you will. And even with all the sort of boy and man training that I got, I remember at a really early age thinking, I don't think that's healthy. I don't think that's good. I'll do it for survival. Like, I'll teach myself how not to cry and how to like suck it up so that I don't get beat up. But as I get older, I'm not doing that. And I'm not going to be friends with dudes who do that. And now in my life, the men that are in my life that I'm close with, they're really open-hearted, expressive, intuitive men. If they're not, I don't judge them and make them wrong. They're just not going to be that close with me. Do you know what I mean? That's not how I roll. And most dudes who are around me, if they're not willing to roll that way, they think I'm a little weird and they kind of move the other way anyway.
but it's amazing that I think even though you had struggles growing up, you also had a lot of love. It's interesting,
Yeah.
the duality of that. And I am chills again. I'm so grateful you are bringing this up, because I want people to look at in their childhood, a tough childhood, and say, sure, maybe I was abused. Maybe my father left, my mother left, I was alone. But what were the moments that provided this love that you shared from your
Yeah.
father? And I felt like when you shared that,
Yeah.
like I got to know him a little better.
Well, and I also think, yeah, my dad had a huge heart, and he definitely loved me and my sister. And he actually, my half sister, Rachel, who my dad was married previous before he married my mom, and Rachel and I are really close to this day. But one of the things I remember when Samantha was born, our now 14-year-old
Yeah.
Christina, and that experience of having your first child, it's just like overwhelming, and it's incredible. It's scary. It's all the things it is, right? For all of us in our own different ways. But I remember being in the hospital with Michelle and with Samantha, and Samantha was born a little early, so we had to stay a couple extra days in the hospital, and she was fine. But we were there, and I was up late one night, and I started writing Samantha a letter because I was feeling really emotional. I'm like, I'm going to capture this. I want to write her a letter right now, how I'm feeling. And I'm writing this stuff, and I start telling her about her grandfather. My dad had died in 2001, and Samantha was born in 2006. So she didn't get to meet him. And I was saying, I'm really sorry you didn't get to meet your grandfather. And as I start to write about my dad in this letter to Samantha, I just drop the pen and the pad, and I start sobbing in the room because I'm like, oh my God, he was in so much pain. Like, I had this moment of empathy because I'm thinking, I've literally known this child for like 3 days. And I swear to God, I would like knock this hospital down if someone were trying to mess with her right now. Like, that's how I felt. And I'm not even like a big tough guy. Like, that's just how I felt. And I'm like, I know my dad felt that same way about us. And the fact that he had such a hard time being a father means to me, he was really sick and he was in a ton of pain.
Yes.
And it just, again, I think, and not to minimize any of the pain that any of us had to deal with. And at the same time, my father still, like, he dropped the ball. He caused a lot of pain for me and for my mother and my sisters and my family. Like, again, both things can be true at the same time. And I think that's one of the things, even with when we talk about grief, and you know this from your experience and from what you teach, it's like grief can be so brutal and awful and like the worst thing ever, and transformational at the same time. Like, how is that possible, that the worst possible thing can also be this extraordinary teacher and turn me into this deeper version of myself that I didn't even know was there at the same time? Like,
And imagine mental illness and grief on top of each other.
Oh,
Beyond brutal. Your dad probably grieved a lot of things in his life with the mental illness. And I can only imagine how painful that must have been for him, Mike.
totally. Well, and in those days, my dad was born in 1933. When my dad first got depressed, he was in college. He was 20 years old. You know what they did to depress people in the 50s?
Electrocuted them?
He had electroshock therapy.
Yes.
He had tranquilizers, and they put him into a mental institution, literally. I mean, and it was like, they called it like people would, haha, they sent you to the funny farm. Like, seriously, like that's the way we talk about people who are not well, who need help and support. And here was this 20-year-old young man who was incredibly smart and articulate and talented and passionate and loving and kind and super sensitive. And then they threw him in a mental institution and gave him electroshock therapy and tranquilizers and told him there was something inherently, fundamentally wrong with him. And then he lived the rest of his life dealing with the reality of that, and also the shame of like, there's something wrong with me, I'm broken. Right. And it's like, what were we thinking? And look, we've made some progress. We have a lot more to go, but we still, and the thing is, his parents were freaked out. They didn't know what to do. Right. And then they're like all of us, they have their own little egos and they want to manage their perception in the neighborhood. And here was their firstborn son who was this wonderful kid. And now all of a sudden, what are we supposed to do? I mean, there's layers to all of this. And this why, to me, it comes back to, Christina, for so many of us, it's like, if we can have more empathy for ourselves and for each other. And one of my first experiences, most poignant experiences actually with death, with loss, so that girlfriend of mine that I mentioned that broke my heart, and some of this was probably a function of that, if I'm really honest and look at it from this perspective, her father dropped dead of a heart attack about a year and a half before we broke up. So we were in our early 20s, right out of college. Her dad and her mom had kids young. He was 50 years old. So like, basically our age right now.
Nearly.
Right. And he had 5 kids. My girlfriend was his second of his 5. They had 3 and then a gap and then 2 more. And he literally like keeled over in the yard gardening and died. And we get the phone call. And I mean, it was, I'd never experienced anything like that in my life. And like literally hearing her shriek and the way that she reacted in the moment was one of the scariest things I'd ever experienced. And I did not know how I was going to handle that and handle her and the whole thing. And we fly back home to Connecticut, and we're with her family and we go through the whole experience. And I remember being down in the basement in their house with some of the relatives, and we're like digging through boxes and trying to find papers and all this stuff. And I'm like, I'm in this dude's like personal stuff, which I feel like, I was dating his daughter and I was kind of close, but I really shouldn't be, but I'm like, oh my God, everybody has papers in the boxes in their basement or somewhere. Right. And it's like, we spend so much of our lives trying to protect and hide and hope no one notices and finds out and whatever. And then when it's all said and done, someone's going to be down in my basement digging through my boxes. And you know what I mean? Like, why are we wasting so much time and energy trying to hide and protect? I mean, I'm not saying we don't keep things private, but really all of the energy that we spend and waste, and we literally don't know. And that's one of the things, like right now, collectively with what's happening in the world, to me, it feels like, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, like we're collectively grieving in a way, as a world, in a way that we've never done before, grieving all the things that we've lost, fearing all the things that might happen, and realizing the world has fundamentally changed, just like the way it feels when you lose when I've lost my sister or my parents or someone close to me, that, oh my God, how did the world just flip upside down overnight? And it's a different world, but it's still the same world. It feels like that's what's happening for us collectively.
And I'm so glad you said that, because it is such grief that everyone is feeling on top of their own personal losses, right, on top of the husband dropping dead, the wife leaving, the girlfriend, falling in love with someone else, the injuries, the cancer diagnosis, the everything. And then you have the whole world stopping at the same time and taking away your connection. And I think this has happened before, but not in our lifetime.
Right. Well,
in a different way.
And probably not. I mean, like I think of in the US here, like we experienced 9/11, and that was one of those moments that like the country stopped and we all went, and it impacted the world. But, and whether you live like here in California, we have fires, or there are places where there are hurricanes and floods, but when those things happen, there was the big fire in Australia a few months ago. It's never been that, at least in our lifetime, that something has impacted the entire world in this way, and all at the same time, that we're literally all at home, trying to protect ourselves and our families, wondering what's happening, going out to get supplies, but being, watching what's happening with the economy. And we're in the middle of this thing that we've never experienced. And everybody, I mean, literally, like, Christine, I wrote this book called We're All in This Together. I,
Right?
I mean, I was not thinking it was going to come out in the middle of a global pandemic, and that's not what it's about. But really, there's never been a time in the world where we're all in this together like we are right now.
I'm sitting here reading all your questions and going through the book, and I'm like, if there was ever a time for a title like this,
Right.
this is the time.
Well, and the thing is but what's interesting, again, back even to grief, is that there is that feeling that I've had in the moments, of like I remember when my dad died, and the first time of really experiencing up close and being in the hospital with him and holding his hand while he took his last breath. It was simultaneously one of the most painful moments and scariest moments of my life. And there was something so beautiful and so intimate and so extraordinary about it. And I remember saying to my sister Rachel, who was there with me, we had been sort of round the clock with him. My sister Lori had left to go sleep because we were all there for a couple of days as he was passing. And I said to Rach, I said, he was here with my mom and with Rachel's mom. He was there when we came into the world, and we got to be with him as he left the world. And I remember, with all of my different complex emotions at the time, I remember feeling this sense of connection and solidarity with humanity, because I thought, you know what? Everybody at some point, if they haven't already dealt with this, will deal with this. And not only will we all deal with losing someone close, not everyone's going to necessarily get the experience of holding the hand and watching them take their last breath, but also watching my dad die, as scary as that was. I thought to myself, I'm going to be there someday.
Yes.
I don't know when, I don't know how, I don't know what it'll look like, but it's like, if that's the end for all of us, I want to, as scared as I am right now, I want to face that. I want to look that right in the face and go, I want to live my life differently, because that's ultimately, and it does not matter. My father could have been, a Nobel Prize winner. He could have been the president of the United States. He could have been a multi-millionaire. He was none of those things, but it still would have been like, there he is on his deathbed, taking his last breath. And, there's something about death to me that's always been simultaneously really scary, but also so important to pay attention to, because it's universal, it's guaranteed, and we live in this crazy way where we think like, it's not going to happen to me, or it's not going to happen to people close to me. Like, of course we know rationally that's not true, but it's like, we don't know how to be with it. So, so many people, I imagine yourself included, even with the work you were doing prior to losing your husband, it's like, then you're forced in a really painful way of like, oh, I have to deal with this now. Yeah. And like,
Mike, one of the things I've noticed about you over the years is, even though your work is with big organizations, I mean, you work with some of the biggest names, Google, I mean,
right.
Again, the list, and I will add all of them in the amazing intro I'm going to do for you in the beginning of this podcast, but you worked with every big name in the industry. And yet, whenever I read something you've written in your Facebook page, it's almost like your foundation for all of your teachings and all of the stage presence that you have an amazing stage presence that you have.
Thank you.
Come from this place of I don't know, loss, but love, losing love. Does that make, like, I see that in you, and I'm like, Mike has to write a book about grief, but then and then I said to myself, but that's his whole education. He's who he is because of the many losses you've been through: visible, traditional, invisible, untraditional. You've had it all.
Yeah. Well, listen, I mean, you and I've talked about this before. I've wanted to, and I still might at some point write a book about loss, about death, about grief, because I've had so much experience. Well, and one of the things that stopped me, and you'll appreciate this more than most people, I've been a little scared, quite frankly, because it's heavy. It brings up a lot of emotion in people, and a lot of strong reaction, and a lot of strong opinion, and and like, I've written in every single one of my books, especially the last couple, I've told stories about my mother or my sister, or, Richard, our friend Chris's, late husband, because it's been important, it's been informative, it's been profound in my life. And one of the things that I have found, though, even when I get up and speak, and I'm always mindful, because I do feel like when I speak, and I speak a lot,
Mm-hmm.
I don't use a lot of slides. I don't use a lot of notes. I always have kind of a general idea of what but I tell a lot of stories, and the stories kind of come to me in the moment intuitively. Sometimes I'll just be standing up and I'll literally start telling a story about my dad or something. And I'm thinking to myself, why the hell am I telling the story? But I just will go with it. And then inevitably, dozens of people will come up to me. Oh my God, I'm so glad you told me that story about your dad, or that's what I needed to hear today. And I'll go, oh, I say all that because what I've noticed, though, when I do talk about grief or I talk about loss, um, I I want to be mindful and respectful of people and where they're at. Because again, I get hired to come and give a talk. I'm giving a big speech at Wells Fargo Bank or at Google. They didn't sign up for a grief workshop. You know what I mean? So to be respectful, it's like, to take people into that place in their heart, like to do it. Not that I can manipulate people in the room, but to do it respectfully and go, hey, we're going to go here, but I'm not going to go all the way there necessarily. Do you know what I mean? So it's an interesting thing to navigate. But my foundation for my life and for my work always comes from my own authentic experience of being a human. And my authentic experience of being a human is I've experienced a ton of joy and gratitude and some extraordinary accomplishments. I've also experienced a ton of failure and sadness and loss and grief. And I believe really strongly, it's like what Brene Brown teaches us, right? You can't selectively mute emotion. So if I say, I'm not going to feel angry, I'm not going to feel sad, I'm not going to feel jealousy, whatever, fill in the blank, whatever bad ones I don't like, if I do that, then I don't get to feel the same level of joy and gratitude and love and appreciation that I want to feel. So I feel like part of my job and what I'm hoping to model and influence others with is, can we allow ourselves to feel the whole range of human emotions and experiences and know that even the grief and the sadness and the loss and the really painful stuff, we don't have to get stuck there. But I was listening to David Kessler on Brene Brown's podcast just recently.
I just interviewed him.
Did you really? Oh my
We
gosh.
just released it on Saturday.
I love it. I'm going to listen to that one because I'm so I met him a few years ago. I love it, but it's like he said, and he probably says this a lot, but if you don't feel it, you can't heal it.
No.
And when he said that the other day, I just got goosebumps all over, and I went, oh my gosh, that's what I've been trying to articulate for many years. We have to feel it so we can heal it. And we're so afraid, but this is also why we need to hold each other's hands. Because sometimes for me, and I think this is true for all of us as humans, I need to hold someone's hand when I'm going into those scary places. I need to go sit with my men in my men's group and hold their hands when I really got to tap into some of my fear, some of my anger that I'm afraid to tap into, but I know that they can hold it. Or I need to sit with a counselor and have, when I've been grieving, to just hold my hand and basically not tell me it's going to be okay in some condescending way, but let me know I'm here for you. I got your back. No matter what comes out, no matter what you say, no matter how you feel, it's going to be okay. And we all need that. And right now, collectively, to do that for each other, even as though we're all grieving and we're all dealing with this, can we hold space for each other in the midst of all of this? So I can have your back and you can have my back, even if we're both freaked out.
And
That's
validation,
possible.
and I think what you're saying is that validation is actually a very important thing in our lives. That if I see you and you see me, and I acknowledge that what you're going through is really hard, especially for the things that we're hiding. And I love the story about your ex-girlfriend's father basement, where you went with these things and you felt like you were a stranger, even though you knew the guy, but really, should you be there? And I've thought about very similar things as well when, even when you're sitting next to the bed of someone who you love is dying, and then there's a nurse that's coming in, and they're in their private area, and we don't know this woman or this man, but yet they get to know the most private stories of our lives. I feel like this is such a beautiful part that you shared. I feel like if we walk out in our life thinking about that in this way, I think we're going to only hold on to the things that really matter. And we are, I love we do need to talk about your book, because the title of this book, we are all in this together.
Yeah.
And you take, you say something in the book that and I'm not going to paraphrase it perfectly, but you said, the first team is the family.
Yeah.
You say that, right? Can you tell us a little bit about that also in relation to what's going on right now, and how that team, that is the family, is also extending into the team of work? Because because we're all in this together and everyone's coming over to our house, the boss,
Right.
my
Right.
supervisor, there's a
Yep.
lot of funny videos online about people
Oh,
passing
totally.
by. Don't you love them? So
It's
you go
great.
ahead, take it from here.
Well, I
Yes.
mean, so the premise of the book is really about, I mean, the subtitle is creating a team culture of high performance, trust, and belonging. And so, the work I've been doing for all these years with companies, with teams, with leaders is a lot of it focuses on how do you create a culture where people can really be themselves, where we can do great work, where we can challenge each other. I mean, all of the things that I've learned over the years from my days as an athlete into, having a chance to partner with these great companies like, Google and eBay and, you name it. I mean, to different industries.
Yeah.
What the, and what I talk about in the introduction of the book is that teams, and I've been fascinated by teams from the time I was a kid. Because again, playing sports, I always noticed it wasn't always the best players that made the best team. It was a combination of people and how we interacted with each other, but also what were the written or unwritten rules of the team and how we operated that had a lot to do with the team's success or failure, not so much all the talent of the individuals. And that's not just true in sports, it's true in business, it's true in life. And most of us, the first team that we have in life is our family. And for better or worse, and most of us, even if we have great family experiences, I shared earlier a bit about some of the challenges in my own family, it has an imprint on us. And so everything that we do in groups as we move along in life is influenced by that first experience with our family of origin. My desire to want to be part of teams and groups and in community, Christina, had a lot to do with, I had a very small nuclear family, me, my mom, and my sister, and we had a lot of challenges. So I was looking for, like I learned from my sister, how do I create a friend group, a big friend group? How do I get involved in activities and things at school so I can feel like I'm part of something bigger? Because I would imagine, I don't know, but if I came from a really big family and I wouldn't imagine everyone would have gotten along perfectly, but there would have been like, hey, I'm home, or hey, I get to see my cousins all the time, or all grandma and grandpa and aunts and uncles. And, I always found myself jealous of my friends who came from really big families because even with the challenge of it, it looked like fun, right? Like my family didn't seem as much fun. It's like, whatever. And I imagine people listening who came from a big family are like, yeah, but there was all kinds of drama and you have no idea, right?
Right.
But again, if you think about that, and then related to today with what's going on, it's like I've focused on the last book that I wrote before this called Bring Your Whole Self to Work. And it's really about how can we bring ourselves, all of ourselves, to the work that we do. And
can I just say your timing of just even that title?
Yeah.
Think about the situation now, bring your whole self to work. No
Right.
kidding.
Absolutely. Right. And it's like, but what's great about right now, as challenging as it is for those of us that have the ability and the good fortune to get to work remotely. And let's first of all just acknowledge not everybody's that privileged.
No.
If you work at a shopping mall or you work at a restaurant or you work, like, there are a lot of people right now who can't work. So as hard as it is to work from home, and I know it's challenging, and the kids are home and they're doing school from home, all this stuff. If we get to work from home, it's a privilege. Secondly, though, what's great, and I love this, and I'm seeing this a lot, it's like the CEO sitting there with the dog on his lap or her lap, or the kids flying around in the background, or people are yelling, and I'm sitting in a closet somewhere because I can't find any quiet space. I mean, as chaotic as it is, it's also giving us an insight into people's lives and to what's really going on. And I'm hearing all these beautiful stories from people saying, our CEO came on the big Zoom all hands call that we had and told us, listen, if you need to go spend time with your spouse or your kids, or you need to go take a walk or what, just go do it. Like, we're all trying to figure this out. Everyone's doing the best they can. And I do feel like it's humanizing work even more. And there is some collective solidarity in that we're all dealing with this macro circumstance of the coronavirus in our own unique ways, but we're sort of connected in that.
But this is why I think your books are even more relevant now. And even though I'm sure you had a lot of talks that, and for everyone who doesn't know Mike, and this is your first introduction to Mike, he's on the plane normally.
A lot.
What is the average trip that you take?
Well, I do about 90 events a year, and about half of them are here in the Bay Area. So what that means is I'm on the road. Usually, on average, there's one speaking engagement a week that takes me out of town. Now, sometimes I go on the road and I'm on the road for 3-4 days and I do 3-4 events. But yeah, so I mean, I'm away. This is one of the longest stretches. I had a trip. I went to Indianapolis on March 3rd, and then I went to San Diego on March 5th, and that was the last trip that I took. So I've been home for a month. Usually, that only happens over the holidays for me, but I won't be back out on the road. Who knows when? But The next event that I think that I'll do is probably in July, and it's a local event. The rest of my events, all of April, all of May, June, they've all been canceled or postponed. So,
But Mike, don't you think though, and I'm sure, of course, there's been fear in your mind about, you're an event, you are an extraordinary speaker. The way you do your work, you step on stage, you go to these big conferences.
Yeah.
But I've been thinking about this, especially because we're going to talk today. I'm thinking to myself, not only you will be doing as many events as before, but maybe more, because the conferences are going to be transformed into more of a virtual experience because they're going to have to keep going.
Yeah. I just spoke this morning to a global audience from Discovery Networks. I was standing here in my office over in the corner and for an hour to people who were in the US and in Europe and other places. And, we're doing more of those. And I mean, I've done some of those, Christina, but it's now going to be the norm, at least for the next few months.
Yeah.
And, and in some ways, I mean, I personally have found this to be both challenging and scary, but also there's an element, and I don't mean this to sound sort of tone deaf to the severity of the situation, but also exciting from the standpoint of, again, that growth mindset. It's like, okay, well, how am I and how are we, the people who I work with on my team, how are we going to figure this out? And in a way, again, I think having gone through some of the things I've gone through in my life, I mean, one of the things I remember saying, and I've said this probably after each of the significant losses in my life, and probably most of us do, but saying to myself, I want to live differently. I want to keep things in perspective more. I'm not going to get so stressed out about stupid stuff. And look, one of the blessings when we do move through grief, I think, getting on the other side of it, one of the ways you're sort of out of the real throes of it is you start getting pissed off and annoyed about stupid stuff, right? It's like
that's definitely a sign,
right? Parking places, or someone gives you whatever steps in front of you in the grocery store, whatever, you're like, what's me? It's like, okay, I must be over it, not over it completely, but I'm getting back to sort of normalcy. That said, though, I've often wondered, how do we stay in a state of consciousness like we are? There's so much hyper-conscious awareness around death and loss for everybody that
right.
we know, again, we say things we mean, we give people hugs, we look people in the eye, right? Which is, by the way, one of the saddest parts of this whole experience. It really breaks my heart when I'm hearing the stories of people getting sick and people passing away and having no one there with them, Christina. It's like,
take that.
I know.
I imagine many things happening, bad and good. This is one thing I have never imagined. Have you?
No.
Never imagined this.
No. And it's like, and that's the place where it's like, and the other part is that one of the things, as lonely as it can be when we lose someone, a parent dies, a spouse dies, and except for the people who knew that person really well or knew us really well or have gone through the same experience, it often is this lonely experience. There's also a part of, there's so much loss right now that it's hard for people the loss to be tended to, if you will. I remember thinking about this after 9/11. It's like we lost thousands of people in the same moment on the same day. And like, I could imagine if you were the family of someone who died on 9/11, it's like, who comes to the funeral, literally, who's there? I mean, again, there's so much happening. And it's not just about getting attention for it, but the community can't rally around you and your family specifically if the community collectively needs to rally around everyone and themselves. So that's another tricky part of what we're dealing with right now. But again, with all of that, I do feel like it can, not necessarily in this moment. It's like what David Kessler, he probably said this when he was on your podcast, but like the meaning part, that 6th stage of grief that he wrote about in his new book, that often comes a little later. We can pay attention to it to some degree while we're going through it. When we really get in touch with the meaning is not when we're right in the middle of the loss, is when we've moved through it some and we look back on it and go, oh, I see what that meant, or I see what I learned. I think sometimes even in the community, like where this great community you've built and created, I think there's a sense that we think we're supposed to get to that silver lining or to that meaning right away. And we do ourselves a disservice. It's what we call the spiritual bypass. It's the like, oh, I know why this is happening. Everything happens for a reason. It's like, yeah, it does. But like, again, you got to feel it so you can heal it. You can't move around that uncomfortable, painful part.
And that sentence is horrible. What's the reason for, losing the people you loved immediately? There's nothing you can see there.
No.
Mike, what are three things that people can take from your book.
Mm-hmm.
And the people that, and this, I want this to go for our team in the family and also the team at work, because a lot of people who are listening are juggling two different teams right now. And this is why I think, I mean, there's obviously some stars aligned for you with this, that it's coming out at this time. And I do hope that CEOs and HR and educational departments in many companies are going to call you and say, we need this book right now, and come and speak to us virtually, because this is what's happening. So give us three things that we can take with us.
One thing is doubling down, tripling down, quadrupling down on being real. Like, this is a moment for authenticity. This is a moment for vulnerability. And I heard someone say yesterday this really simple thing that I thought was beautiful, but for anyone who's in any kind of management or leadership position, whether it's in your family or in your company, instead of thinking yourself as a manager or a mother or a father, think of yourself right now as a role model. And not a role model like you're supposed to be perfect and you're supposed to have it together and you're supposed to be confident, but like role model, how do you want the people around you to be experiencing this? And can you model that? Can you show your children what it looks like to be scared and to do it anyway? Can you show your team what it looks like to not know and show up authentically anyway? You know, there's that saying, circumstances don't define us, they reveal us. So the first thing that's really important for us to do, for people to do, for teams to do, is be real with each other. The second thing is to check in with each other as human beings, first and foremost. Right? I know it sounds so simple, but it's like literally every conversation that I'm having these days is starting with some version of, how are you?
How are you?
And it's a different, if you notice, we're asking that and we're really meaning it. We usually say, hey, how are you? How's it going? What's up? You know, but then you're like, fine, how are you? But like, no, really, how are you? Like right in this moment, how's your family? Like, how's your heart? And really not to be melodramatic about it, but to be real so that we're making that human connection. And then the third thing that's really important, I think, for people and teams, and I talk about this a lot in the book, is to be able to appreciate each other and look for things to appreciate. And again, I don't mean in some Pollyanna phony, like, oh, everything happens for a reason, this is all going to be great. No, because that's like not real. But to really look for, I've been doing this with my own team every day. Like, we spend time appreciating each other, thanking each other, not so much for outcomes and results, although if there are them, that's great, but just for like, hey, this is what I really value about you. Thanks for showing up. Thanks for saying that. You know, just the little things, but they go such a long way, because right now all of us are some version of freaked out, understandably, right? And if we can just remind each other like, hey, I got you. I care about you. I'm here for you. Like, we can't say that or feel that enough from the people around us. And even though it's our work professional environment, sometimes, like, even more important there, so that we know that people are really caring about us. Because in a non-crisis environment, caring about the people we work with is one of the number one motivators for connection, trust, and performance. But especially in a crisis, that's what we need to know more than anything else, is the people around us actually care about us.
And I think all the teachings and talks you've given and books you've written, I think ultimately they feel so right for where we are. It's almost like the lessons you gave are all we all need. And I've come to see you at a bookstore when you're in California. I think it was Oakland, but I'm not sure where it was. But and every time I've seen you speak, you talk about authenticity, sharing, emotion, being present, being human, bringing the whole self to work. We're all in this together, and I think your whole life, Mike, has prepared you to lead us today, my friend.
Thank you. Yeah,
it really has.
Well, listen, I appreciate you saying that. You know, I mean, I really feel like, yes, and like everybody, I'm also just trying to get up every day and, you know, as our friend Glennon Doyle likes to say, do the next right thing. Do the next right thing. That's all we can do. I mean, I think one of the beauties of this moment, and it is hard, and I'm not trying to do the phony silver lining thing, but it is forcing all of us to just be right here in the present moment, because the truth is, I don't know what's happening next. I don't know where this is all going. Every day I look at the news, I get both freaked out and like, oh, didn't think of that thing, you know, and it's like, whether we're talking again about our health and well-being, whether we're talking about our, you know, the financial reality of our lives and businesses, or whether we're talking about our mental or emotional state, I think for whatever reason, we're all getting an opportunity to really get present. And like anything, it's uncomfortable, and there's an opportunity for us to grow and to learn if we choose to, but that's really up to us.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are choosing that. Mike, where can we find you? Where can people find you? And what is the full title of your latest book, and the date that it's coming out as well? And we will put links to the podcast, the YouTube. There will be links everywhere.
Yes.
Just share for us, for everyone who's listening.
Thank you. Well, the full title of the book is We're All in This Together, Creating a Team Culture of High Performance, Trust, and Belonging. It's actually coming out earlier than it was scheduled to come out. Our publisher wanted it to come out sooner. So we're launching it on April 14th. So if that's when people are listening, or before or after,
yes.
Either way, there's a page on our site that we set up. It's mike-robbins.com/together. And on that page, there's info about the book and how you can order it. And we actually created some bonus material that folks get when there's a webinar with me, and there's some extra audios, and then there's some action guides that we put together with the book. So
I'm not surprised. I didn't know that it was coming. So we will plan to release this on that Tuesday, I believe it's a Tuesday the 14th.
Yeah, awesome. That'd be great.
Look for the link for everyone. Look for that link for all the bonuses and everyone, so people can get free stuff too. Mm-hmm. Mike, thank you for your journey to here, and we are so appreciative and grateful for you, and not only for the people who meet you at work, but I think especially now for the people who meet you at their homes as well. I think your value and your insight is going to be even more important than ever before.
Well, thank you, my friend. Thanks for having me on your podcast. I'm honored to know you. Excited to see all your great work as it's continued to expand over the years since we met, and just appreciate who you are and what you do in the world. So thanks for having me on.
Thank you, Mike.